So if you've been hearing news about people dying in ICE custody recently, and it has occurred to you to ask how many people are actually dying there, turns out you could have found out up until a couple of years ago, but now it's a little bit more difficult. And joining us now to break it down is the man who broke the story, Ken Klippenstein. Welcome back to the Damage Report.
Hey, good to be with you again.
Good to have you here. So your most recent story actually has to do with a website that up until recently logged deaths in ICE custody. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so what's interesting is the deaths that they logged went all the way back to the founding of the institution of ICE. And I want to remind viewers that ICE is very young. It's not, like a lot of federal institutions we have going back to, at least World War II. ICE was a post 9/11 institution founded in 2003 under George W. Bush. In largely in response to the attacks. And so the deaths that had been included on the list went all the way back to that year, the year of the founding, and then it ends. The last death listed is in I believe it was May of 2017, and of course Trump was inaugurated a couple of months before that, and that's when the listings end.
So interesting and perhaps not coincidental. Have ICE officials been forthcoming with why this list is no longer being updated?
Well, that's what was surprising me. It was such a simple question. I mean, I would expect at least some sort of boilerplate response, like, "Oh, maybe you can find it in the news or find it up in our." They had no response. So your guess is as good as mine, unfortunately.
So I guess I'm curious, would it be possible to use like a Freedom of Information Act request to find out if there had been emails? Like, were they directed to shut this down from outside of ICE? Would be my suspicion, but I don't know exactly how you'd go about finding that out.
Well, what's strange, the page itself doesn't even have an explanation. I do a lot of FOIA work, and I look at a lot of different agencies, and typically, when they stop doing a long-standing practice like that, maybe it's for nefarious reasons, but they'll at least offer some kind of like self-serving explanation. Kind of like, it was too time intensive or something. It just doesn't say anything. All it says is it just has the last post, and then it has a list of dates. It says data from blah, blah, blah to 2017 and just nothing.
So I want to get into how consequential this is. I mean, I know it would be easier to answer this question if the website was still being updated, but do we have any idea since the middle of 2017 how many people should be on that list but are not?
Well, what's interesting is they have another page now called, I think it's Death Reports, and that was mandated by Congress for them to put up. But these deaths begin in, I believe it was late 2018, and so that leaves a year, half of Trump's term so far, that we have no data for. So, and also the criteria for these death reports they're posting appear to be different than the criteria in the original list. And again, no explanation for why they have this, other listing that is different. And why is it different? Why don't they just put it in the same thing they used to? But it's interesting that Congress, sort of forced them to put something up. And I have more reporting on this coming out later, but readers should know that that list is not the same as the other list, and that what I'm being told by sources within ICE is that list is pretty sanitized in terms of what it tells you.
Interesting, and actually that leads into my next question, because there's hiding information by not having a list. That certainly hides the information, but then there's also hiding the information by having information but having it be vague so that you can't actually know exactly what's going on. So it appears, based on your story, that some of the cause of death in some of these instances is kept purposefully vague and could be hiding either negligence or even criminal behavior. Is that the case?
I mean, I'd say calling it purposely vague is even a little bit generous, because if you look at the explanation of the deaths for every other, for Bush and Obama, almost everyone had a, explanation of what exactly happened. For the majority of the cases under Trump, for the data that we have going up to mid 2017, it just still says pending. And these deaths are now what? That's 2 years ago. I mean, I imagine they figured out what happened. I hope so, at least. And it just says pending, no explanation about when they're going to update that or if they ever will. But these cases that they haven't updated it for so long ago that I imagine it'll just stay like that forever.
I'm going to make a bold prediction that nobody's investigating those anymore. I don't think anyone's like punching in the clock today, like today I cracked that case. I don't think that's gonna happen. But again, on your previous work on preventable deaths and deaths due to negligence, there's been apparently some interest from some politicians. Have we found out anything more about this? Is anything going to be done to stop these sorts of deaths from happening?
More on that to come, but what I'm seeing is a lot of talk from Congress and from people in the inside ICE that I can't get too specific, but are trying to bring about change on this. There's an enormous amount of frustration about Congress's unwillingness to go beyond issuing statements about this.
I want to ask you one other question. I apologize I didn't warn you that I'd be asking you about this, but you've been doing work on ICE. You know more about ICE than I do. Last night, Donald Trump announced that starting very, very soon, ICE would begin deporting literally millions of people. Based on what you know about ICE, its manpower, how it's deployed, all of that, is that a remotely feasible thing that he could do in the near future?
It is not. But it still cause for enormous concern because any kind of, I hate to use this term, but unfortunately I think it's applicable. Any type of ethnic cleansing operation is always a logistical nightmare. So I don't think that means that we shouldn't worry about it, nor am I saying that you're saying that, but no, they don't have the resources now for it. But what that's gonna mean is I fear it's gonna be done in the sloppiest, most inhumane way possible.
Yeah. And I also noted a little bit earlier in the show that tonight is going to be the formal launch of Trump's campaign effort. And we know that based on some of the moves his administration has taken recently, they're willing to do pretty much anything, including start a war possibly to get elected. So I have a feeling in the area of immigration, they're going to be pushing policies that you're going to need to be investigating in the near future. And if people have tips on any of these stories, how can they actually get in touch with you?
I would encourage them to reach out to me on Signal. That's a secure, encrypted platform that you can be relatively confident is not going to be able to be subpoenaed or snooped on from your employers. I list my phone number in my Twitter bio and also in my news articles. And then if you're not someone in ICE that needs that level of confidentiality, if you're say an attorney for an immigration attorney or other maybe a rights activist, you can just contact me via my email, which is also listed on each of my articles.
Awesome. Well, Ken Klippenstein, TOT Investigates, thank you as always for the great work.
Great to be with you.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.